I just want to go over a few quick key points on how I set up for a sumo deadlift, primarily in gear. The way I pull raw sumo is a little different than the way I pull in gear sumo. It's a little easier to sit back and to get into better position when you're in gear because you actually have something to sit back into, as opposed to raw sumo. It's your own body that's kind of holding you up, and it takes a little more strength. It also takes a little lot of you as well to hold yourself up. It's just so much easier to sit back into something like you're sitting into a wall. You have something to push off of. So I'll go over a few just small key points that that's helped my deadlift as my form has evolved over the years. My deadlift took off like a rocket. I got to 800 really fast, and then it stalled out for probably about 2 or 3 years. And my deadlift has recently started to take off again because I've started to make these small changes in my deadlift form. Instead of listening to what works for everyone, I experimented and I found what worked for me. So hopefully what I have to tell you about deadlift today will help your deadlift. This isn't necessarily the right way to do it. This is just how my deadlift has taken off in gear. And I have a lot of friends who are just ridiculously strong sumo, but they don't know how to use their gear. They're probably losing 100 pounds easy out of their gear and while pulling sumo. So just a few quick things here. First, just getting set up is now, if you can't square up when you go down to reach the bar, and when I say square up, that's just what I think of in my head. When I mean square up, if you can't squat down with your knees open, squared up, like sitting in a strong stance, like if someone was going to come at you, you'd be able to stop it. Let's say, for example, your knees are in and your shins are into the bar, and you're pulling like this. You're not squared up. It either means you're not mobile enough to pull that wide sumo, or you just didn't try hard enough in your warm-ups to get your hips, your glutes, your hammies, everything warming up to be able to get into that position. So let's say you're out in a wide stance, feels comfortable for you, and you can't square up. You have to come forward first, and your shins are in the bar and your knees are coming forward like that. I want you to just rotate your feet in and then your heels in, and then if you can squat down and then square up, that's where you want to start. That's probably the first place to start. If you are immobile or so wide to where you can't square up, you're just killing yourself from the start. So once you're in a position to where you can actually square up, I wasted a lot of time following the advice of some very smart people. This worked for them, but keeping your nuts on the bar was something that I fought with forever, trying to get my deadlift really strong, keeping my nuts on the bar, which means keeping your hips and keeping your nuts, literally trying to keep it as close to the bar as you can. So when you're squatting down, you're trying to keep your nuts on the bar. Now, to get low enough to where my hands can actually get to the bar in my gear, my hips are very, very, very low, and it just puts you in a bad starting position. You don't necessarily want to squat the weight up on sumo deadlift. You do want to stand up with it, but you don't necessarily want to squat the weight up. So I wasted a lot of time starting super, super low and just wasting a lot of energy. So now what I do is I kind of take side shots of what a strong hip starting position looks. Yuri Belkin is someone that I've been watching a lot. His hip placement is actually relatively high. So what I'll do is, instead of bringing my nuts to the bar as I squat down, I'll push my butt back and actually sit into my heels until I'm in a strong position. I'm squared up and I'm in a strong position to where if someone was going to come at me, I could be able to keep them from pushing me over. So once you've figured out, from side angles and from friends, where a good hip angle is, where your glutes are nice and high, then you get in that position, and to get down to the bar, you just hinge down. Your hips don't move. So you just hinge down. What I like to do is I'll grab the bar with one hand Take 3 breaths. Grab the bar. My hips are still in the same position. And then I'll pull myself up. Okay. So you're actually pulling the slack out of the bar. And it's so much easier to do this in gear as opposed to raw. Strong starting position. You're in your ass and you're in your heels. You're open, you're squared up. And then once you get where you want to be, your hips stay, but you just hinge your torso down to get to the bar. Only go as far down as you need to get to the bar. If you were in tight gear, it's going to be hard in the first place. So you should only hinge down as much as you need to grab the bar. So then once you have the bar, hips stay in the same spot. You lock your back in and you pull yourself back, and then explode up through the bar. Now, watching really, really good sumo deadlifters, again, like Yuri Belkin, you'll notice that his technique is almost like doing a clean. You know, how when you're doing Olympic lifts, you only want to bring that bar up as far as you have to before they dip under it and snatch it and catch it. Same kind of idea with sumo deadlifts. As soon as you get that weight moving off the floor, I picture myself locking out as soon as I can and getting myself under that weight. So at the same time, it's lock, but as you're locking your legs too, you're squeezing your ass as hard as you can. So it's lock, squeeze. So at the same time you're locking your legs out as fast as you can, you're squeezing your ass and dropping your hips through as fast as you can as well. This is something that took me a long time to kind of get. If my legs are tired, it takes me a little longer, like today, for example, for tonight, my legs were pretty tired. So it took me a little longer to get to where my legs locked out, but my glutes are still super strong. So as soon as I locked out, locked out my knees, it was no problem. My glutes were really strong. But if my legs are feeling fresh, as soon as that weight starts coming off the ground, once I pulled the slack out, as soon as the weight moves off the ground, I'm trying to lock out, lock and hip. Lock and hip. And it isn't just locking out, it's squeeze your ass. Your ass is what brings your hips through. So instead of saying, pull your hips through, pull your hips through, pull your hips through, this didn't do anything for me. As soon as I started thinking squeeze your ass, that's when, boom, hips came through really hard. So these are just a few things that really helped my deadlift take off. And another thing with figuring out your good starting position, probably for a good month or so, I had friends, training partners, watch me from the side, and as soon as my shoulders were straight above the bar, that's when I knew I was in a good starting position to go. If you're in a starting position where your shoulders are above the weight, that means as soon as you go, weight's gonna come forward, put you on your toes. Instead of in your heels and in your ass, you're gonna be on your toes and in your knees, which is where you don't wanna be, because then you have to just fight gravity and just wheel it back even harder. So have a partner or a training partner watch you from the side, and when you're pulling back, getting into upright position, you're arching your back, getting into upright position, and as soon as your shoulders are flush straight over the bar, that's when you go. It took me about a month of my training partners watching and saying go as soon as my shoulders were in place. It took me about a month to get to that feeling where I knew where I was, I knew where my body was. So now I don't need to have anybody give me those cues. I know what my body feels like when I'm over the bar like I'm supposed to be. So those are just a few things for you to try. If anything, start with shoulders over the bar and squared up. If you're not squared up and on your heels and your weight is out over the bar and your shoulders are out over the bar, there's really no point in you even using gear because you're not using it. You're just pulling through your toes and you're pulling through your knees. You're not utilizing the gear at all. So start with those couple things and watch Yuri Belkin. I mean, he's got probably the sickest deadlift form I've ever seen, and it's only been since I started trying to mimic his form that my deadlift has taken off. So I hope this helps you, and do everything I just said, Corey Smash.